Hey, Bob.
Hi, Mickey. How you doing?
I'm okay. I'm in a sort of noir setting here for the discussion of the Republican undernews.
The undernews?
Here at the, undernews is a sort of a word I used. Other people have used it earlier, but for the news that's bubbling under the mainstream media that the mainstream media hasn't yet, hasn't reported, but is maybe checking out. That anyway, people find out through blogs or the National Enquirer or tabloids. The Edwards love child story was the classic undernews story.
Oh, I've heard of that story, yes. And what is the undernews coming from the Republican convention where you are, even as we speak?
Well, no, the undernews is this story about Sarah Palin's
Mickey, I think that
kid.
one's made it onto mainstream media, unless I'm mistaken.
Well,
unless those
now.
3 front-page stories on yesterday's New York Times were an aberration, all about this very subject, I think that's hit the.
And did they? And how many of them? But how many of them actually mentioned the actual story, which is that, the story that she faked her pregnancy, and which I think is wrong, but that she faked her pregnancy and it's really her daughter's child, her Down syndrome child.
Well, that was in the first day stories. The claim was, it was very odd the way it came out. The way the Bristol Palin story came out was that the campaign was now releasing this information to counteract rumors that the Down syndrome child was actually Bristol's.
Okay, but
that was in mainstream. That was everywhere.
Right, but even that that is an innovation. In other words, previously, before the John Edwards thing, the mainstream media would just have reported the official story, which is that she was that her daughter was pregnant, not then use that as an excuse to drag in the sort of undernews allegation that's not true.
The campaign itself dragged it in. The campaign's official line was, "We're doing this to counteract these stories," which is pretty weird. And now the question arises: were they then covering up? Was that a cover-up of the fact that actually McCain didn't know about this? Because if McCain knew about this, the question arises: why would they? So McCain knew about this when he picked her, and the plan was to release it on the first day of the Republican convention? That doesn't make any sense. So they have to have an excuse for releasing the news, right? And so my theory, briefly, I don't know, it could be true, is that what they were covering up was McCain's failure to vet this woman by casting the decision to announce the Bristol thing on Monday as a reaction to this blog item about. This is so convoluted. I can't even keep talking about it.
Well, I have an alternative theory. Mm-hmm. Because Dan Balls reports in the Washington Post today that they did know, but they only found out about at the last meeting with Palin. But she didn't
there
tell
only was one meeting with Palin.
Well, no, but there was there were 2 meetings, but they were on the same day. And maybe they found out at both meetings. Yes, but they found out at the meeting with Palin.
So they didn't. So the vetter should be fired. The vetter flew up to Alaska and didn't say.
No. She met with the vetter that day. She met with the vetter in the morning and then McCain in the afternoon. And at one of those meetings, I have the story here. I could look it up. She did tell them before she was offered the job and accepted. So he knew before he offered her the job, but maybe it was only like an hour before he offered the job.
It does still sound like the whole decision. The whole selection of her was so hasty that there really was not time for them to assimilate this information.
But this information is not that horrible. I mean, her teenage daughter is having a kid and is marrying, and then so she's forced to marry the guy.
Well, wait a second.
So they have a shotgun marriage. That's not so terrible.
Well, you're saying it's not terrible. That's not the same as saying there are no voters who will be put off by it. That's the calculation that McCain should have been making as the candidate.
I actually think there are more voters who will find it appealing, so I think it's a net winner for him.
Appealing, really?
Yeah, because life is what Steve Schmidt said. Life is messy, and people lead messy lives. And I'm a guy who thinks Thomas Eagleton should have stayed on the ticket because if he got all the votes of everybody who'd been depressed, he wins the election.
Well, then I think we can discard your analysis of Bristol as well. If the argument you're making is that wacky in its grounding.
But let me get my theory out. Okay. My theory is that Schmidt, which is pretty obvious, Schmidt is trying to gin up conflict with the press. So he is trying to say So he volunteers the information. And we just did this because of those scurrilous press rumors. And, and one of the speakers last night, I think President Bush attacked the angry left. They want a war with the media now. And
sure.
So they're releasing things in an attempt to gin up a war with the media because that's one of the things that's going to make Palin appealing. I mean, Palin she has real potential to be a huge winner for them.
That was my first reaction to her when he came out, when she appeared with McCain and gave her a little talk. I mean, first thing that was clear was this is no Dan Quayle. If you remember Dan Quayle in his very first appearance with Bush 1, it was clear that something was amiss. This guy was punching way above his weight. He was way out of his depth. And with her, it was kind of the opposite. I mean, not that she was a master orator, but A, she's going to be very appealing to kind of middle Americans. And B, as a speech giver, she was perfectly fine. And she exploited the authenticity. Her speech giving exploits the authenticity that she kind of gives off. So I was not one of the doubters of her at all.
No, I only just now looked at a video of her speech. And it's weird. She's great when she just takes the podium and is speaking spontaneously. She's actually worse when she's giving the speech.
Well, that's kind of like McCain himself.
The speeches, yeah. But McCain has given good speeches, but he hasn't given a good one lately. Even he was better. But she is incredibly appealing and articulate and poised, etc.
I would not say Mickey, I would not say I think maybe you've fallen in love a little. I would not say she's incredibly articulate. She can finish a sentence, and that's good.
Articulate in the sense that she doesn't stammer. Her grammar is correct. She speaks clearly and distinctly. All the things Joe Biden said about Barack Obama. She's clean and articulate.
I think you got a little bit of a crush on this woman.
I mean,
Mickey.
Obama probably has a much, much larger vocabulary. It's more nuanced. She's good enough. And she's certainly beats the lowered expectations that, elitist MSM snobs have about mayors of Wasilla, Alaska.
Okay, we should say now, we're taping this before her speech tonight. And my prediction is precisely because... whether intentionally or not, the expectations have been so lowered, her speech will be a triumph. I mean, there's such a kind of sense of disarray and uncertainty around her, and there's been so much bad-mouthing of her. Her speech, I'm sure, will be hailed as a success, don't you think? Whatever she says.
Yes, it's hard to believe. It's sort of like, it's hard to believe she could screw this up. Yeah, so I think her speech will be a success. But my point is, she'll be even better on the stump. That's what's just a disaster.
Well, we'll see. I mean, it depends on whether they subject her to interrogation. We don't know whether she can really think and talk about politics and policy without making gaffes. We don't know that yet.
That's true.
And I'm mildly skeptical. I saw a video of her talking to a church. It had been the church of her youth, and she had come back as governor to give an inspirational talk to some people who had graduated from some class or something. And, what struck me was how totally plausible it was that she would be this person in this role. In other words, you would be at like a high school or at a church, and they would bring her back as somebody who had been there 10 years earlier. And she was kind of fine in that role, but she didn't, blow you away. I mean, The part about her being governor would have come as a surprise,
But here's the thing. You got to read Chris Orr's article in the New Republic. I mean, she beat Frank Murkowski, this venerable figure of Alaska politics, by 30 points, okay?
Yeah.
She has a history of triumphing in politics.
It's a short history, Mickey.
No.
Mickey, do you know how many votes were cast when she won for mayor? Do you know how many total votes were cast?
My guess is 2,000.
No, you're way high. You're way high, slightly over 1,000, many fewer than in my student body election in high school. I mean, I wasn't running, but in the student body elections in my high school, okay? And then the other election is governor. That's like one really substantial election, okay? Let's don't go overboard here.
Did you win your student body election?
No, I said it was not about. I was not in it. I was not a politico in high school. I won in elementary school.
Well, there you go.
But then I got out of politics and devoted my life to truth-telling. And that's where we are.
But Chris Orr's is a much-needed tonic for people who underestimate this woman. And the other thing is, the other thing that struck me about the speech is it was straight Bob Shrum populism, or was Bob Shrum populism perverted a little with McCainism? But McCain actually said in his introduction, "I'm here. I'm on your side. I'm here to fight for you, the working people of Dayton, Ohio." That's like straight boilerplate Bob Shrum.
Well, yeah, but everybody says that. What are your policies?
Republicans haven't said that before.
And the fact is, her policy history is turning out to have been a little oversimplified in some of these very regards, right? Like, she took on, she was against the bridge to nowhere. Well, that turns out to be a little more complicated, the truth behind that, right? And so, I don't know.
Well, but she did manage to, wrest at least some concession from the oil companies. Maybe it was a minimal concession.
She's also for drilling in Anwar, so I wouldn't say she's exactly devoting her life to frustrating their aims.
Everybody in Alaska is for drilling in Anwar.
Well, exactly, which brings up a question. I mean, everybody says, the Republicans are saying, oh, energy's so important, and she's an energy expert. Look, I would say that the last person who should be trusted with making decisions about the energy policy of the entire nation is somebody who has traditionally such a vested, narrow interest in energy policy, which is to say, she just likes drilling for oil because she's from Alaska. I mean, that's not the person I want these decisions made by.
I'm not for her. All I am saying is she seems formidable.
I think she is not to be discounted at all. But I will, to get back to Bristol, and you say, oh, this is nothing. Now, politically, whether it's nothing or something, I think is undetermined yet. And I will say that among these, it's true that you've heard the evangelicals are rallying. There is a non-trivial constituency among conservative evangelicals that a mother should stay at home, and if she doesn't, and if she has this big career, then the kinds of things that will happen is your 17-year-old daughter will get pregnant. And I'm told that if you look at the comments section on the website of, Dobson, the Focus on Family or whatever guy,
right.
You see a certain amount of this sentiment against her, okay? And leaving aside the politics, which I think are uncertain at this point how it's going to play out, I mean, I don't think that the pregnancy of her daughter is going to endear her to anyone who is not going to vote for her anyway. I really don't. But as for the politics, but let me just get to the merits of the case. I want to make an argument that it should matter that her daughter is pregnant. Okay.
Okay. All I'm saying is the press attacking her for the daughter will endear her to people. But
that's true, and that's why. Although I'm about to make an argument that her daughter's pregnancy is a legitimate reason to vote against her. I don't recommend Obama supporters making this argument because it will backfire. But
okay, make your argument.
Okay, first of all, this is an argument that should appeal to conservative Christians, I would think, and the argument is this: if you believe that role models matter, right, that the way our most prominent citizens live their lives really shapes our value system,
right.
Okay, and if you think unwed teen pregnancy is a bad thing, so you do not want that norm validated, then you should be against the daughter of the Vice President of the United States being an example of an unwed pregnancy that turns out well. And that will be the story. It will be this very prominent example of it working out fine. And Levi, Johnston, the father, worked out for him. He's suddenly hanging out in the White House. Their kid is taken care of. So I think it's a terrible example.
But if it works out because the man marries the woman and sticks with her, it's not clear that that's not a good example.
Well, there are two questions. Should you get pregnant in the first place? A, and B, what should you do when you get pregnant? The point is, this has effects on both of those questions. It validates the view that getting pregnant in high school is okay because it will be a very prominent example of it working out fine, and her being invited to the finest parties and no stigma being attached. And I would think if conservative Christians were really true to their ideology, this is the kind of judgment they'd be passing.
Now that I think about it, it's even worse than you're saying because it validates the fantasy of teenage girls that if only they get pregnant, their man will stick with them.
Right. He'll stick with you if your mother's in the White House, maybe.
And this would be like the one case in a million where that actually works out.
Right.
And it would, that's a good point.
So this is, I'm serious. I mean, I am more morally conservative than a lot of liberals. I have actually made role model type arguments like this in the past, and so have you. I mean, I remember we were both upset by the Janet Jackson thing at the Super Bowl.
This isn't as bad as that.
Well, I don't know.
You've convinced me, Bob. This is
but
you can do that on blogging heads.
Okay, so you surrender. No, you don't surrender. You join me.
It's not a macho thing, Bob.
It's not zero sum. When am I going to get out of that zero sum mindset, Mickey?
You're like John McCain. That's right.
It's non-zero sum.
Your mindset is incompatible with a world of global terrorists.
Okay, here's my other point.
The very worst instincts.
Here's my other point about McCain, though, is I do wish that it could become... I mean, is it your view that there was sloppy vetting and hasty decision-making? Because I think, if so, that would play into a meme that deserves more momentum, which is that McCain is dangerously impulsive in his decision-making.
Don't worry, the media will take care of that meme. Yes, the answer is yes, but the countervailing thing is he impulsively and sloppily made a pretty good decision. Even with your bad role model thing, she's a pretty good decision compared with some boring Midwestern governor. He's behind, okay?
He's behind. But Mickey,
he's got to shuffle the deck, and this is a pretty good shuffling of the deck.
I personally thought that right after he appointed her, but it seems to be the case that the trend in the polls since the announcement, in the wake of basically all this stuff, has not been pro-McCain, right?
It hasn't, and I haven't looked at the polls today. What happened today?
I think today the Gallup tracking, maybe yesterday's Gallup tracking reached a new high in the gap between Obama and McCain. And the Real Clear Politics gap is higher than it's been in a long time.
That was last night before this morning's polls.
I don't know about this morning's polls. I don't have.
If I click to another window, will that screw up our video cast?
Probably not.
Okay. Well, so while you're talking, I'll go to...
Okay. What other thoughts? Well, anyway, really, it is true. This McCain as dangerously impulsive meme, it's a true meme. I mean, it's like, I really want that out there. I don't want this guy deciding whether we go to war. And in fact, his biography, which so much is being made of by the Republicans, I think, manifests a history of recklessness. He brags about it, right? I mean, last night, Fred Thompson was bragging about how many demerits McCain got at military academy.
But they were principal demerits, Bob.
Oh.
That's true, and something Lindsey Graham said about Sarah Palin applies to McCain, which is, she'll be fine given the infrastructure we have in place. McCain will be fine because there's going to be some guy who stops him as he's lunging for the nuclear button, right?
No, wrong. His advisors are all neocons, Mickey. It's the worst of both worlds. It's a crazy, impulsive decision maker surrounded by guys who like war.
Are they all guys who like war? I don't even know who his key foreign policy advisors are.
They're guys who are arguing for ginning up tensions with Russia even as we speak.
Well, ginning up tensions for Russia is one thing. I mean, Lindsey Graham, when he came to Newsweek to be interviewed, did take the line you were worried about Georgia, which is, Obama misunderstands. He doesn't understand this is the new Cold War. We must mobilize the world to confront Russia. And this is, this is very suspicious because McCain he doesn't care about domestic policy. He lives to mobilize the world to confront somebody about something. So if the threat isn't really there, he's going to come up with it anyway. And the threat was obviously overstated because this is an area of long-standing historic import about Russia, and just invading South Ossetia isn't the same as invading Afghanistan. But he had dialed it back a bit. In other words, instead of saying we have to kick Russia out of the G8, he basically said we have to put kicking Russia out of the G8 on the table. We know the Europeans will stop us, but we have to at least threaten them. And instead of saying we have to include Georgia in NATO immediately so we can have a war with Russia over Georgia, he said we have to move our assets in NATO, military assets, toward the east as a sort of a much less dramatic way of signaling to Russia that we.
Wait, does he mean move more of them into Eastern Europe as opposed to, or what? The east of Georgia?
I assume we
don't have assets in Georgia.
I assume we should, whatever the easternmost NATO country is, we've got a lot of the assets. I assume that's Poland.
Well, that's spooky. I mean, that's what I don't want to hear. But look, he's a dangerous guy. I'm totally disappointed in what Obama's saying on foreign policy. But at least that Obama is not going to be surrounded by crazies. You hope. For me, this is the reason to vote against McCain. Yeah. And you're right. You put it well that his whole M.O. is to, how did you put it? Say there's this huge threat out there, whether it's the way campaign finance is done, whatever. I mean, it's like there's a huge threat out there. We've got to mobilize, pour all our energy into fighting it, or the world will end, right?
Did he do that with campaign finance? I don't think so.
Well, so you're saying you're not saying he does that with domestic policy, only with
right. I'm saying he lives for a foreign policy crisis.
That's his favorite kind.
Like Bush, he wants to be a war president.
It's his favorite kind. Yeah,
that's what he knows how to do. Unlike Bush, Bush, the problem was he didn't seem to have a purpose to his presidency until 9/11 came along. I think McCain has other purposes, but he just doesn't sort of care about them as much.
Although oddly, you realize there's this complete kind of dichotomy in his history. For the first 20 years after Vietnam, he was against all military intervention, as far as I can recall. And then in the middle of the Bosnia debate, he flipped, and he's been at the exact other extreme ever since.
Huh, that's interesting.
In fact, I believe that when we intervened in Kosovo, he wanted to go further and send troops, ground troops, into Serbia, which, by the way, is eerily parallel to what we're chastising Russia for doing, which is to say not just intervene in the secessionist area, but send ground troops into the country that is denying that area its secession. McCain was for that when it was us doing it.
Huh. That's very interesting. If only you could get him to buy into some domestic crusade as the moral equivalent of war. A war for national health care.
I don't think that one he can really buy into at this point.
Are you upset that Sarah Palin, while she was allegedly so busy preparing for her speech that she was unable to even show up at previously scheduled speaking engagements, found time to meet with the leaders of AIPAC to reassure them of her support of Israel?
Well, you know why she maybe had to, I didn't know she had done that, but she apparently is linked to Pat Buchanan. Right?
Eli Lake reported that.
Reported the Buchanan link?
Reported the AIPAC meeting.
So that may be why she had some reassuring to do, although I certainly don't think they doubt McCain's own commitment.
Well, why do they need to be reassured before? Why are they so powerful they need to be reassured before she's nominated? Do they have a veto power? It's insane.
I don't know. People do attribute a certain amount of influence to them, but I think the Buchanan thing is maybe the reason she had to make a special appearance.
Well, they were apparently satisfied.
So what did you think of? Did you listen to the speeches last night? I mean,
I did. I listened to all of Thompson's and I can't stand Lieberman, so I sort of tuned out.
Isn't he one just bad speaker? I mean, I don't think it's just that I don't like him. He's horrible.
He did do one brilliant thing in the speech, which is he got the Republicans to applaud the achievements of the Clinton presidency, which A, established his bona fides as a Democrat, B, stuck it to the Republicans in a sort of dramatic, sort of subtle way to imply that, like, I'm not like a total patsy, buddies, and C, appealed to Clinton voters, which is the whole point of a lot of what's going on at the convention. So it was just a threefer that I thought was pretty cunning.
I missed that part. I must have been rolling my eyes over whatever he had said before, and I just missed it.
But he said, we reform welfare and balance the budget and save Social Security, or I forget if there have to be three, so there was a third one. But it was good.
But there's something just about the very texture of his locution that is just like, get me out of this room, right? I mean,
yeah, no, he's self-righteous and smug about it, and he has a sort of allegedly ingratiating lip curl that is the opposite of ingratiating.
What did you think of Fred Thompson's speech?
Thompson is weird, and this is the other, aside from the feeding frenzy over Sarah Palin, the other big news in the convention is, will McCain succeed in sort of cementing the base and recasting his candidacy as this sort of populist, crusade against the evil Congress, including the corrupt Republican leadership in Congress. Thompson, I guess, was the red meat for the base speech, and I didn't think it was quite enough. And part of that's because I think Thompson is he's like a bad actor, and because he's a bad actor, he's a bad politician. You always realize that he is just reading the lines. You never say, God, this is what Fred Thompson really thinks.
It seems slightly perfunctory, yes.
There were a couple of points where he got beyond that. I thought, he delivered. There's parts of the biographical section on McCain that worked. But when I saw
the biographical section was almost the whole thing.
Well, no, there was the early part about chastising the media for jumping on Palin.
By the way, what did you think?
Obama.
What did you think of audience response to that? It seemed to me that when Palin's name was invoked, the response was kind of solidly supportive, but not some kind of frenzied rallying to a besieged leader level support.
The response throughout has been tepid.
Yeah,
maybe they're staging it. Maybe half the delegates were from Gulf states and they didn't show up.
You mean to everything in the convention?
Everything at the convention. Yeah. There is no deafening applause. There's no frenzy of excitement among the Republican delegates to anything.
If you looked at the video, there are certain images that do get a lot of applause. Reagan and Bush too, and certain that don't. Martin Luther King, Eisenhower. So there were levels. You could discern different levels of support, and I thought the Sarah Palin support was a little short of hysterical.
I just thought, he was supposed to whip the crowd into a frenzy, and he failed to do that. And he's supposed to whip the crowd into a frenzy in a way that appealed to people back home, and maybe he did that a little better. But I just thought it was like, it was a couple bricks shy. It's like John Cougar Mellencamp or something. You say this guy's almost great, but God, if only he was like a little more sincere.
But he does have a way of vivid imagery. I mean, did you realize that, unless I got this wrong, if I understood him correctly, when McCain was a POW, he had boils on his arm the size of baseballs? Did you know that?
I did not know that.
Of course, if I understood Fred Thompson correctly, they were the size of baseballs, and I don't know. I know McCain's forearms are bigger than mine, but I do not think boils that size could fit on my arm. And you talk about deploying the moose, saying something that a lot of people thought nobody wants to say. And again, this is also something Democrats shouldn't say. But do you ever wonder whether the mythology about McCain's days as a prisoner of war are somewhat larger than the reality? I don't know. Boils the size of baseballs?
I don't know, and how would you check it?
Exactly. It's an intrinsically thinly sourced story.
There have been evil left-wing bloggers who've questioned McCain's account.
A tactical mistake. In fact, what I just said should be deleted from the internet because it's not in the interest of liberals to be caught asking questions like this. But there have been even one of the anecdotes Thompson told last night, which again must have come from McCain, about when he was on an aircraft carrier, and there was some, it was a friendly fire thing with a missile, but there was a catastrophe on the aircraft carrier, and a guy who was burned beyond recognition looks at McCain and says, how is so-and-so, like his superior officer, like how is Captain so-and-so okay?
Yeah.
And McCain says yes, and the guy says, thank God, and then dies. Now, I'm sorry. Does something like that really happen other than in a Hollywood movie?
I actually think that happens all the time, yeah. When you're in a crash, you ask how the passengers are, and then sometimes the
says
crash is
thank
fatal.
God and dies right after saying it.
Well, he didn't say right after. He just said that he died.
Now, go listen to Thompson's anecdote. Go listen to Thompson.
That was the best anecdote in the speech.
You like that? Did that give you goosebumps, Mickey?
Yeah, that drilled home what military service is all about in a way that better than the POW anecdotes. That was a better anecdote, maybe because it was fresher. The other line he delivered really well was he was right about the surge, and because of the surge, we're winning. That's sort of an important point for them to make.
I think you'll hear it again. I think they know that it's a good point.
But he made it well. Yeah. It was one of the few lines he delivered.
Still, I would say when Laura Bush delivers what, to my mind, was actually the best speech of the evening, because she's not a great orator, but I thought hers was better than Lieberman's and really, in a certain sense, better than Thompson's.
Huh? I didn't even hear it. What was so good about it?
Just she's likable. She just said the stuff, and she's likable, and they liked her. And it was before Bush did his by videotape, and then they went from there to Thompson.
I thought Bush's videotape speech was pretty good. For Bush, it was better than he usually is.
Yeah, I mean, he said that McCain is the guy to lead us in a time of threat, and of course, in a war on terror, it's always a time of threat. So there you go.
No, just in terms of his delivery, he didn't have his Texas strut backup. He seemed to be.
Well, the hurricane was a great excuse to tone it down and be effective.
The real point that you could never make here, and that I tried to make the people, and I was even in private conversations told to shut up, is that there's something overdone about every time a hurricane approaches the coast. Now it's like a big deal, and we have to drop everything else we're doing and start giving money to New Orleans. It's excessive, and it's somehow just because Bush screwed up the relief of New Orleans. Somehow we're saddled with this obligation for the next 2 decades.
Now I'm deploying the moose even as you speak, and no, I agree totally. And I mean, I just thought evacuating the whole city. What are the chances that this hurricane is going to hit New Orleans dead on the way the last one did? And there are always costs. I mean, I would be very surprised if no one died as a result of the evacuation. When you clear out every intensive care unit and every nursing home and move these, I'd be surprised if nobody died.
Bobby Jindal actually admitted that people were dying practically.
Yeah. I mean, don't get me started on this. I mean, the total mishandling of risk to human life in our policies is, it's the reason we invaded Iraq. I mean, in a certain sense, because...
I don't understand.
Well, because, I mean, the thought was, if you had said, why are we doing this, then the people who supported would have said, well, we don't want to have a 9/11 2 years from now, or something like that. Well, look, if 3,000 people die every 3 years, then terrorism would be like just about the most trivial source of death in America, okay? That's just not much. I mean, I'm not recommending that we do things that would court that, but in the scheme of things... the level of death that they were trying to prevent by going over and killing 100,000 people or so and losing several thousand of our own and creating all this turmoil, that this was a very small amount of death compared to, the things like drunk driving.
Our reaction is explicable only in terms of the symbolism of the terrorism, which is, of course, what Al-Qaeda was concerned with. And I'm not saying it's an illegitimate concern, but they did knock down these 2 tall towers in our most important city.
Well, we showed them, Mickey.
If they had just killed 3,000 people in some more mundane way, it would not have provoked the same response.
Yeah, but we had already done Afghanistan. I mean, it's not like there had been no response,
No, I understand, but I'm saying we wouldn't. The impulse to have a very strong response was aided by the symbolic castration image, I believe.
Symbolic, I hadn't picked up on that. If the Freudian thing is really what pushes the case for war.
No, Bob, you're mocking me when
Mickey.
I'm agreeing with you.
I'm joking, Mickey.
They're trying to. The reason Al Qaeda attacked those things was because it was a highly symbolic theatrical act, and the reason we reacted was not just that 3,000 people died, but because it was a highly symbolic theatrical attack on our honor and achievements.
Mickey, I was kidding. Okay, it was just a little war on terror frivolity. Jeez.
And manhood, I may add. But anyway,
Speaking of manhood, can I just... Oh, well, go ahead. You were going to...
No, I was going to go into my boring, tedious typology of the media, so go ahead.
Well, we've been talking for a while, and I'll give you your menu of obsessions to get to. You had emailed that there were some other things also. Well, we've talked about McCain in Georgia. Okay, immigration reform and card check.
Well, it's completely clear that McCain, from Lindsey Graham, that McCain intends to go ahead with it. Lindsey Graham practically said he will do this. So he's dropped sort of virtually all the pretense that he's shifted his position on immigration. And
now, is Lindsey Graham, is this some event you were at the Republican convention?
Well, this is my theory of conventions, Bob. Conventions are good not because anything happens, but because big politicos come and they talk to Newsweek, and people like me get to go and hear them talk at Newsweek, although now a lot of them are on video, so anybody can hear them talk. And they're loose-lipped. They say things they shouldn't say. And you learn a lot, and you see them up close, and Lindsey Graham is sort of an appealing guy, more appealing than I expected. But he did say that it's clear that McCain is still for comprehensive immigration reform.
Okay.
What were you going to say? Sorry.
No, I was about to ask. So Graham convinced you of that. So you think he's actually going to do it if he's president?
Well, sure, if he's elected. And in contrast, Obama, deleted all references to immigration reform from the speeches. So what does that tell you? I don't know. It seems to me, it tells me that they're a little scared of the issue and that maybe they won't pursue it. But it could also say that they're trying to smuggle it past the border, as it were, and then deploy it once they're in office. I don't know which way that cuts. The other big issue go ahead.
Nothing. I just say what I said last time. I certainly don't expect the Obama campaign to move to McCain's right on immigration during the campaign, given that they'd like to hang on to the majority of Hispanic voters.
Well, I guess a lot depends on how what McCain does. If McCain makes a successful plea for Hispanic voters, and I think he's going to make a slightly bigger push on immigration than Obama did, which was like not at all. He's going to try to appeal to them without pissing off the base. If that's successful, then of course Obama won't. If Obama's locked down the Hispanic vote, it seems to me in October he can show some understanding for the plight of people who feel that the nation doesn't want to be inundated by another wave of immigrants, and he doesn't have to make any promises, but just showing understanding, I think, will get him a significant chunk of votes. So I'm kicking that can down the field.
So what you're hoping is that Obama will at least not lock himself into favoring immigration reform, and then we'll just let things sit once he's in office.
Well, he said he's favoring it. I'm hoping that he'll prioritize when he gets into office and decide he would rather do national health care than immigration reform. I'm a little worried that, whenever I hear a story that says the Democrats are already backing off of national health care, because if you're a cynical, power-mad Democratic Paul, it's much more important to lock in 12 million new Democratic voters than it is to have national health care. So Nancy Pelosi may well decide she'd rather have comprehensive immigration reform than health care. So when it comes to prioritizing, they may throw health care out the window. That's what worries me. But
I'd be pretty shocked.
I'm pretty confident that the Democrats Rahm Emanuel has recruited from marginal districts aren't going to go for making immigration reform priority one on day one. That's sort of like plunging into, gays in the military on day one, which damaged Clinton badly during his first term. You don't want that to be your first issue. So I'm pretty confident that McCain is much more likely to achieve immigration reform, which would be disastrous than Obama is.
Then you really are for Obama, and all doubt has been removed. You do support Obama.
Oh, yeah. When did I not support Obama?
Well, I mean, you always said you did, but there are people who might have suspected your sincerity, since they suspect your sincerity about support of liberalism in general.
Well, they do that all the time.
Right. They're just like that. You wanted to talk about card check, too.
Well, there was this interesting article in Slate by William Gould, who was a Democratic sort of pro-labor member of the NLRB.
And, of course, card check is this thing that Labor wants that I guess would require votes to unionize to be open ballot so everybody would know what your vote was? Is that
worse
right?
than that. It's worse than that. There's no one election. It's the union organized go around with the little cards, and if they can get workers one at a time to sign cards, if they get a certain percentage, 50%, then they don't even have an election. Then the union is just in. And, of course, once the union is in, it's very hard to get it out. So there's no election at all, really. It's just people sign these cards. There's no, like, one day when everybody votes.
Well, would just open ballot election be a reasonable compromise?
It'd be better than card check. What's wrong with the secret ballot election? People don't have unions for perfectly good reasons. It's not illegitimate to decide you don't want a union.
Yeah, I don't know much about...
Is Blondie Heads unionized?
Yes, we have a very strong union. Uh-huh.
Yeah, okay, well.
In fact, they're on strike, which explains a lot. But... I mean, I don't know the card check issue inside and out. I do remember we had actually good debate, like more than a year, like 2 years ago or so, like a long time ago on card check.
Yeah, but here's my point. Oh, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, the one thing I learned is that this, card check may not be, I mean, first of all, there are things about it that just intuitively sound objectionable. I mean, the idea of a secret ballot is a big part of the democratic tradition in America. But I remember... upon hearing the debate, I did come to appreciate that although maybe this isn't the perfect tool for labor to wield in response, it did come to my attention that management can really play hardball when somebody's trying to unionize.
And, that's true,
and that's partly what this is a response. For example, big companies can say, and apparently have said, and apparently have delivered on this threat, if you unionize at this outlet, at this Walmart, and I think Walmart may be an example, we will shut down this Walmart to set an example to all other, Walmarts or something.
It's weird. I haven't even gotten to my point yet, Bob, where I didn't want to have a general discussion of card check, but as long as we're having it, when I went to work at the Federal Trade Commission in 1978, under Carter, sort of the high watermark of one of the ways of liberalism, we tried to start an initiative to make it an unfair trade practice to close a factory. And the FTC members, who were all, most of which pretty liberal, sort of said, well, you're telling a guy he can't close his factory and retire to Florida? It's like indentured servitude for capitalists. And there is sort of this aspect of, Why does an entrepreneur have to stay in business just because his plant is unionized? If he doesn't want a union, why can't he close it down and start up somewhere else? I don't quite understand how you can make that illegal, or why that's even worse, how you can make threatening to do that somehow illegitimate, which is part of the whole etiquette of labor law. Oh, he's threatened to shut down the plant. Why can't he threaten to shut down the plant? When I'm negotiating with my boss, I threaten to quit. So I don't really intend to quit, but I threaten to quit, and it's my right to quit. Why isn't it the entrepreneur's right to quit?
Well, for one thing, I don't know. I would say that puts large companies at an unfair advantage relative to small companies, because you have to be a huge company to be able to make that threat plausibly.
I think sort of small companies have make the threat plausibly because it's one guy who can retire to Florida. General Motors has to build cars somewhere, and wherever they're building the cars, there'll probably be a union, or a threat of unionization.
No, but a company like Walmart, or with lots of outlets, is positioned to do this in a way that a small company is not. A small company, in other words, if a single act of unionization constitutes a third of your workforce, it's pretty hard to plausibly say, well, then we'll shut, we'll put an end to all those jobs. You're saying we'll cut off 1/3 of the company. But anyway, I don't know. I'm not an expert on card check. I would say that that's not the only kind of hardball they play. Anyway. I mean, at the micro level, management plays hardball to discourage voting for unionization. But I don't know.
I understand. But my point is that this guy Gould wrote this article that basically said we're not going to get card check unless we get a veto-proof Senate. I don't know if that was misinformation, but basically he said that this threat that I'm worried about, that you're less worried about, isn't going to happen unless Democrats get a 60-vote majority in the Senate, and most of the pundits who I've read think that it's a real long shot that the Democrats right now would get a 60-vote majority in the Senate. And so then a card check isn't going to happen. That was the news. So maybe I'm like, much ado about nothing. And he proposed some intermediate solutions that we should both take a look at and talk about at some point that are short of card check that seem much more reasonable to me.
Well, Republicans are trying to make a big deal of card check, so it may be in the conversation whether or not it's plausible.
I think it's a winner for them.
Although, I don't know. I was wondering about that. How many people, aside from, like, ardently pro-business people who are already going to vote Republican, how many people are really vehemently against card check?
Well, I think when they're presented with it, the problem is that it conflicts with their big outreach, which is to blue-collar Midwestern voters, who are probably the demographic group most likely to be sympathetic to unions. And, McCain stressed that Sarah Palin and her husband were both union members, and so I don't think he can do that and make card check a big issue.
Yeah.
But I think if he made card check a big issue, in the absence of that particular appeal, it would be a winner for him. But
okay. On Sarah Palin, do you really want 4 years of the soap opera? Do you really want, these stories in People magazine about Bristol and their baby and Levi Johnston, the hockey stud?
You mean Sex on Skates?
What?
He was described as
Sex on Skates, according to New York Magazine. Right. I mean, it cheapens. I don't want it.
Did you ever see the movie Soap Dish?
I don't think so.
It's a surprisingly good movie with Sally Field and Kevin Kline and Whoopi Goldberg. And it's basically this ditzy soap opera woman has this incredibly messy, complicated personal life. And America loves her for it. And they just love learning about what, she's one step away from the pit and one step away from a mental breakdown. And it makes her fantastically popular. And I think Sarah Palin has potential for the same thing. And this point has been made. It was made by Politico almost immediately. She has problems the way everybody else has problems, and that makes her more appealing. So yes, I think you're distinct from America. We're certainly in a McCain presidency. There's not all that much he has to do. He's not going to be able to accomplish his health care plan. Maybe he'll do comprehensive immigration reform and start a couple of wars. But aside from that,
host a soap opera. He can host a soap opera.
It's an administration of stasis, but so what will fill the vacuum will be the soap opera.
Wow.
Yes.
That's pretty creepy.
Obama, we actually has things, a huge agenda he needs to accomplish, so a soap opera would be a distraction, an unwelcome distraction. But with McCain, it would be a welcome distraction.
He won't have one anyway. Okay, well,
thank you for
we'll see how she does. I do think, in terms of the appeal of her ordinariness, I don't think I'm the only person who likes the idea that in a vice president, especially one who has a not implausible chance of becoming president in the next 4 years, you like to see a certain estimable quality, right? When you think of who is our president, you don't just want it to be quite every man or every woman. You want something more, and she's got a little something more, but we really don't know yet. Because they haven't let her out of the cage. We really don't know whether she can have it both ways and seem like a really impressive leader-type person while seeming ordinary. We'll see.
How is every man not estimable, Bob? That seems like a direct assault on social equality.
I think the definition of estimable rules out the possibility of everyone being it, but maybe I'd have to... Speaking of definitions...
You don't think daily life is a struggle just to get through the day and go to work and feed your kids? Well, there you go.
But I didn't say I was estimable.
I think you are estimable, Bob.
Well, it's very nice of you to say that. And, Mickey, I feel the same way about you. But reasonable people will disagree, which leads us to our comments.
Okay.
Now, first of all, I said while we were taping last week, during your long-awaited return, that I could hear the hosannas bubbling up from the comment section.
Yeah.
The commenter Dell begins his comment, or her comment, with Hosanna! Exclamation point. What do you think?
So it sounds like he was responding to your prompt, Bob.
No, I think it was a total coincidence. D Sharp, that's D-E-E, Sharp, writes, people only pray for relief when there is some hope that their prayers can be acted upon. I assumed that our Mickey-lessness was unavoidable and simply waited. That's nice. And D, that sounds like it could be a female Mickey. It could be a woman who's saying that, who would have prayed for your return had she thought that there was a chance of the prayer being answered. Lily, Mickey, Lily, another female-sounding name. What?
Make her vice president. Go ahead.
She's as qualified as I can say without knowing anything about her. She's as qualified.
I was just.
Never mind.
You're falling into the trap of showing elitist snobbery.
I know. I'm definitely doing everything Democrats absolutely should not do with regard to Sarah Palin.
You sound like my mother.
And her family. What?
You sound like my mother.
What? Is she sniping about Sarah Palin?
Totally, yes.
Really? Excellent. Yes. We should get her on Blogging
But
Heads.
she'd be fantastic. But she underestimated Ronald Reagan too. So.
Yeah, I did too.
Be warned.
But I was young.
All right.
So Lily writes, and somewhat cleverly titles this the Mickey Cows Club, I think. I'm not the first time you've heard that phrase probably, but fans of Mickey Cows now have their own group on Facebook. Anyone can join. Just search for Fans of Mickey Cows. I'm not aware of any other blogging head with his or her own Facebook fan page. So Mickey, another female-sounding fan. Now, I got to say, Abu Nur al-Irlandi took a little of the wind out of her sails by saying Mr. Iglesias and Ms. McCardle have Facebook fan clubs also.
You're just setting me up for some kind of fall here. I know you're going to come through with some wonderment.
No, I'm not like that. Osmium, this is a liberal, says, preach it, Mickey Cows. Now, granted, he or she was referring to a specific clip. This is a specific dingle-link where you said that the Obama's line should be, look, McCain got us into Iraq, he'll get us into war after war if we don't keep him out of the White House. But still, another favorable review. Now, wonderment. This brings us to wonderment, Mickey.
Yeah, I knew this was coming.
Wonderment does not have a history of unalloyed support for you, as you know.
Yes, is Wonderment a man or a woman? Have we figured that out yet?
We don't know, and I brought that up, and Wonderment refused to say. So okay. we think of Wonderment as someone who transcends gender.
Okay.
And Wonderment, and I think, and the amazing thing is, even this can be taken as affirmation of you, Mickey Cows. Even Wonderment. Okay, you ready for this?
Yeah.
This, after I had Hugh Hewitt on, Wonderment watched the Hugh Hewitt thing and said, Hugh is my nomination for all-time most nefarious right-wing extremist to appear on Blogging Heads. He trounces the competition. Jonah Goldberg and David Frum simply cannot dream of playing in Hugh's loony league. Bob, you may recall, promised a rollout of right-wingers to successively outdo the vacationing Mickey. Well, this is as bad as it gets, Bob. We surrender. You've made your point. Now, Mickey, the way I read that is, Wonderment is saying Mickey Cows is not the most loathsome person on the planet.
I didn't know you'd classified me as a right-winger, Bob. I take offense at that.
No, I didn't put it quite like that. What I said was I wanted to bring on a series of people who would annoy our commenters more than the average commenter, although you certainly have your fans, more than you.
Okay, well, I accept whatever praise, whatever implicit, negative, backhanded praise may be lodged somewhere in Wonderman's comment.
I think you're on your way to winning Wonderman's heart there. That was nice and humble.
I love you too. How about that?
There you go. You're learning.
Okay, there you go. I'm soon I'll be qualified for the vice presidency.
I wouldn't go that far. Have you?
It's time for a blogger vice president, damn it.
Have you ever shot a bear or a moose?
No,
she favors aerial hunting, like flying around in helicopters and killing things from the air.
Well, and there's a video of on Slate of that you can get to on Slate. It's an animal rights video of somebody shooting a wolf, and the problem is you don't get a clean kill. The wolf writhes around.
Right, you can't. What do you do? I mean, this is
you pump a few more bullets in them, Bob. That seems to be what you do. But it's an inherently.
I'm not sure that's as easy as it would be on the ground.
It's an inherently unsporting way to do it.
Yeah, I think the gun gives you really enough of an advantage against the wolf, personally.
The problem is they've classified wolves as predators who think they sort of want to kill the way you call rats or deer. And I don't know if wolves are like that. I have a feeling that classifying them as a predator is a way to get around the federal ban on aerial hunting, and they really just do it because they like to do it.
That's interesting. They may cause mischief. They probably cause some kind of mischief for some Alaskans. They probably, Yeah.
Slate. I've been neutral on this ever since I read Farley Mowett's book Never Cry Wolf about how wonderful wolves are, and it's this gripping sort of non-fiction account of him going to live with wolves, and then it turned out he made it all up. So screw that.
Well, my thinking is my dog Fraser is pretty closely related to wolves, and so my allegiance is clear.
You're not like flaunting your damn dog again, are you?
No, he was in here briefly, but then he was removed.
Because that was like the cheapest play for sympathy I've ever seen.
My dog.
That was totally beneath you. And the dog doesn't come over well on TV. The dog is only good in small groups, Bob.
You've seen the dog in person.
Yeah, but don't have the dog give televised addresses. He has to be in a small group.
He mostly does small groups.
He's like Dan Quayle.
He does them better than Dan Quayle. Okay, quickly. Andrea6 apologizes to you. ANDRYA6. Mickey, I owe you a huge apology. Earlier this year, I put some major snark on you about your pursuit of the John Edwards rumor, but now she realizes you're trying to save Democrats, or he. Why do I think? Well, Andrea. Sounds kind of like Andrea. That's why I think it's a she, but who knows? Now, X. Judson raises a question I had wondered about. That I shouldn't worry about about the polls being close. They were closer last week. The polls are way off. Cell phones are not polled. And I had wondered, clearly, I've got to think that a higher percentage of Obama supporters are cell phone only people than McCain supporters, but I assume the pollsters try to correct for that statistically, right?
Well, also, we have some history in the primaries. Did the polls radically underestimate Obama's support? No. Sometimes they did, sometimes they didn't.
Yeah, but
sometimes Obama did worse. So the cell phone users didn't always come through for him, and you would think they would have more impact in a Democratic primary than in the general, maybe.
No, actually, I would think the gap might be bigger in the general than in the Democratic primary. I would think Republicans are overwhelmingly less likely to be cell phone-only people than Democrats.
Right, but that's true, but anyway, there's countervailing factors of the Bradley effect, so Democrats who rely on cell phone users are whistling past the graveyard.
Do pollsters not try to statistically correct for the demographic?
I did not know. That's a good question.
Because if they are not, then I would think they got to be missing something. I mean, more and more younger people are like it's all they have is a cell phone.
Yeah. By the way, I looked at the latest Gallup poll. Obama's lead is down from 8 to 6.
To 6.
Yeah. So it's still bigger than it was, but it's going in the wrong direction. So.
Yeah. Although that poll itself, like 1,000 people, is one day's Gallup poll only gets so much. Deserves so much.
Yeah, but that and Rasmussen are sort of the best things out there for tracking daily. So.
Mickey, Zeus99.
You're just going to go on and on, aren't you?
Yeah, I'm going on. Well, asked an interesting question that was kind of implicitly raised by a couple of things I said, I guess. Can I ask this to you? Who is smarter, Clarence Thomas or Joseph Biden?
Tough call. I do believe that Sarah Palin, there's a good chance that Sarah Palin is smarter than Joe Biden.
Really?
She's certainly smarter than Dan Quayle. She's not as knowledgeable as Joe Biden. But Joe Biden really has a tough row to hoe in this debate. He has to somehow seem smarter than this person who's just as smart as he is. He has to seem more knowledgeable without putting her down and condescending to her. And he's just not a guy who does that kind. He has to seem like he hasn't spent 20 years in the Senate. I would not want to be him going into this debate.
I think we really don't yet know how smart she is because we just haven't heard her say much that wasn't written on a piece of paper she was reading.
Yeah. Read Chris Orr's article.
Well, I'm sure she's an effective politician, and she's ruthless. She, fired the police chief for not supporting her in the election. Is that true?
I thought she fired the police chief because he wouldn't fire her ex-brother-in-law.
They're separate things. I think some people she fired because some jobs that were traditionally autonomous, she fired the occupants because they did not support her politically. That's what I read. Although some things you read are turning out not to be true. Now this whole question of whether she belonged in the Alaska Independent Party has become unsettled.
Well, I'm for patronage, and I guess that means you fire people who don't support you. So.
Yeah, but it's like police chief, that's creepy.
Well, if you can't fire the top guy, who can you fire?
You raise an excellent question.
Anyway, please pick the one best commenter, and then let's
get out of here. Let me. This will be very quick reference to 3 comments. The aforementioned Dell seems to be wanting to start a kind of a thread on harmlessly hawkish sound bites for Obama. In other words, things that Obama could say that sound hawkish but don't have much consequence. That's an interesting exercise, although when he said one of them would be to support missile defense, B.J. Keefe said that's where he would get off the Obama boat.
I bet it would be hard to find one that you would approve of, Bob.
No, actually, Dell had a not bad one. While my opponent wants to keep borrowing money from the Chinese so we can stay in Iraq for 100 years and keep South Ossetia under Georgian control, the Chinese are taking our interest payments and investing in 21st century weapons and challenges. That is an interesting way of saying you don't want to spend money on Georgia.
Okay.
Finally, we won't touch on this week. Maybe sometime in the future. Simon Willard kind of raises the question implicitly of what sorts of snobbery are good and what sorts are bad. At least that was. But finally, remember that
that actually sounds interesting, Bob. So you want to drop that one? Anyway, go ahead.
So you do want to talk about that?
Well, we can talk about it next week.
Okay, so I don't want to forget about it. It is an interesting question. I mean, we touched on this once when we said, well, there's a sense in which McCain's a snob, blah, 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 but we should devote a whole segment to that.
Okay.
Finally, was that I chastised you for misusing the word reticent as a synonym for hesitant, when that is not its essential meaning. The noted writer Gary Christ writes in and points out that recently that your usage has become an accepted usage in actual dictionaries. To my mind, that is another sign of the decline of the American empire, that we're getting that promiscuous with our language, but I stand corrected. But then meanwhile, 2 commenters, Jersey Boy and Morningsider, together call into question whether you correctly had the correct meaning of the word bemuse in mind. And if you didn't, I didn't either. I think I had the wrong. I think I was wrong. What is it you think bemused means?
I think bemused just means confused and baffled.
Oh, then you were right and I was wrong, because that's what it means.
And it's misused to mean confused and amused at the same time. It has nothing to do with being amused.
Well, it's funny. There should be a word
that is amused and baffled at the same time. And if not bemused, what word, I ask you?
Well, I thought it had connotations of amusement, but I don't think because of the way it sounded, but because of the cliche, bemused detachment. Like somebody once said, you're looking onto the scene with bemused detachment.
And if anything has been, if any new definition has become accepted by common misuse, it should be that and not reticent. There.
So you think that is an example of misuse? In other words, they don't mean to say confused, baffled detachment. They mean amused detachment.
Correct.
Okay.
It's a useful thing. So let's not, amused yes, reticent no. That's our platform for the 21st century.
And I'm standing by it. That would be change you could believe in.
Okay. Well, anyway.
So
I should come up with some McCain pickup lines, but I don't have any.
Yeah, speaking, just in closing, how would you compare the experience of an eminently eligible devil-may-care bachelor at the Democratic Convention, which you were last week, with an eligible and devil-may-care bachelor at the Republican Convention?
Well, it's weird. I always thought Republican women were my target demographic group because Democratic women sort of hate me because I'm a neoliberal traitor. And Republicans see the potential to get a convert, so they're always saying, come on over to our side, it's better. And you'd rather be the latter than the former. But I can't say I sensed that pull.
Really?
Maybe it's because I spent the entire convention in my hotel room blogging. But anyway,
alone.
There's a huge difference. Denver was this frenzy of excitement and crowded, and St. Paul is this poor little town that thought these conventioners were like going to come and make them rich and put them on the map, and they have their like spotlights and Klieg lights, and nobody came for the first 2 days. It was sort of pathetic and sad. And now people are finally coming. But St. Paul is just such a lower key deal. It's just like, as we said, even in the hall, there are not that many cheers. I mean, it's sort of
well, but the Democratic convention took a while to. Well, no, it didn't, because they had Michelle on the first night. They had like a really interesting speaker on the first night.
Even when they were screwing up, there were millions of people running around saying, "Why are they screwing up? This is crazy. They're wasting the first night."
Right.
Nobody's saying that about McCain.
Well, I think tonight is going to be very interesting with Sarah Palin. I'm not missing this one, and I think it'll be received as a success, and I think she'll get the crowd cheering louder than they've cheered so far. And
I agree. Well, people will be able to see if we were right or not. If we ever stop this and get it on the air.
But, Mickey, I'm enjoying it too much.
Okay. Well, I have a horrible typographical error in my blog that I have to go correct.
Okay. I don't want to get in your way.
So, and it's already gone out on RSS feed. Anyway, okay.
All right. See you around.
See you, Bob.
Bye.